Hey guys, tonight we slip into the blistering heat of a long-forgotten military misadventure where French boots melt into Egyptian sands, camels look deeply unimpressed, and you, dear listener, are standing right next to Napoleon Bonaparte as he squints dramatically into the desert sun. You just arrived in 1798 Egypt with the French army, and it's not quite the glorious conquest you imagine. There's grit in your shoes, a headache blooming behind your eyes, and someone nearby is definitely brewing coffee out of something that isn't technically coffee. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet as the Mediterranean gleams like liquid tin under a punishing July sun. You're sweating in wool, because of course the French military hasn't yet discovered the wonders of linen, and the air smells like sea brine, old cannon grease, and Napoleon's ambition. You dock at Alexandria, which contrary to your officer's rousing speech is not quite ready to welcome you with palm fronds and baklava. The city is chaotic, dusty, and fortified by defenders who are mostly confused and extremely annoyed. You step off the gangplank and instantly regret it. Your boots hit dry, crumbling sand that sucks in like quicksand. Welcome to Egypt. Napoleon, meanwhile, looks radiant. He's got the wild glint in his eye again. The one that says he thinks he's founding an empire but might actually be having a heat stroke. His plan? Seize Egypt, boot out the ruling Mamluks, cut off Britain's route to India, and declare France the center of the universe. Again, historians still argue whether this invasion was strategic genius or just a fever dream, fueled by too many Enlightenment pamphlets. Some say Napoleon wanted to rival Alexander the Great. Others say he just wanted a sandbox where no one could interrupt his speeches. What's clear is that you're here now, along with over 30,000 French troops and more baggage than sense. And oh, the baggage. You have wagons groaning under crates of uniforms, barrels of spoiled wine, several extremely nervous horses, and a collection of live chickens someone swears are for morale. You also notice something odd: camels. Not just one or two, but dozens, wobbling, chewing, and making eye contact like they know this is going to go badly. These are not military camels. These are market camels, civilian, mildly grumpy beasts roped into war because someone read too many exotic travel logs and thought, perfect, load-bearing desert ships. What could go wrong? It's like trying to vacuum sand effective, in theory. But the sand doesn't want to go. The defenders fall back quickly, some even abandoning weapons as they flee deeper inland. Others melt into the population, waiting, and the city itself. Alexandria isn't just old, it's ancient. Crumbling pillars lean like drunk sentries, and narrow alleys twist between sun-bleached buildings where cats stalk you like tiny sphinxes. You pass graffiti in Greek, Arabic, and hieroglyphs, all layered across walls that have seen more empires than you've had hot meals. You're assigned to a cramped courtyard next to what may once have been a bathhouse, and is now just a very warm pile of rubble. There's no water, no clean linen, but there is a man trying to cook something on a shield held over a fire, and it smells vaguely like goat. You eat it anyway, because rations are already low. That night, the sky above Alexandria is thick with stars and thin with clouds. The desert wind sneaks through gaps in your tent, carrying sand, whispers, and the scent of distant spices. You try to sleep, but your neighbor is loudly arguing with his camel, who has stolen his hat. The next day, Napoleon gathers the troops for one of his classic "everything is fine, I'm a genius" speeches. You stand in the sun, blinking sweat into your eyes, as he launches into a monologue about glory, destiny, and how the French will civilize this land. He also name-drops Caesar, Alexander, and the pharaohs within 60 seconds, which might be a new record. What he doesn't mention The locals aren't excited about being liberated, nor does he talk about the crushing heat, the limited water supply, or the Ottoman Empire, which technically still owns this place. The tales, apparently. Later, you watch as engineers sketch fortifications in the sand. Their pencils snap, their tempers fray. Sandstorms swirl out of nowhere and erase their work. One man just gives up and builds a tiny sandcastle instead. Meanwhile, the scientists Napoleon brought, because yes, he brought scientists are having the time of their lives. They're wandering around Alexandria measuring shadows, scribbling notes on the flora, and arguing over whether cats here are more majestic than in Marseille. One has already started drawing the ruins like he's on vacation. You're rationing stale bread, eyeing your last clean pair of socks, and realizing your commander doesn't know how to pronounce Delta. Still, for a moment, just a moment, you lie back against a broken column, close your eyes, and feel something ancient humming beneath your spine. The stones whisper of forgotten gods and buried cities. The breeze smells like history, dust, and goat stew. You open your eyes to a camel staring down at you, chewing slowly, judging silently. The spell breaks. Napoleon is already planning the next phase. You'll march and land next toward Cairo, toward the Nile, and toward the beating heart of this unforgiving land. But for now, as Alexandria settles into uneasy silence, you listen to the far-off sounds of the sea, the click of hooves on cobblestone, and the low murmur of a language you don't understand but soon will. You wake to the sound of camels making noises that can only be described as eldritch. Somewhere between a groan and a disgruntled gargle, it reverberates through the early morning haze. The sky over Alexandria is still dim, pinkish and pale like an old bruise. You're expected to pack up, saddle a camel or attempt to and begin the trek and land toward Cairo. The coffee, such as it is, comes out of a dented tin kettle boiled over coals. It's thick enough to patch roof tiles and tastes like regret. One of the engineers claims he saw someone use it as ink last night. Still, you drink it because hydration and caffeine are now two of your few remaining joys. The camel is not thrilled about this arrangement. You try to climb on, and it kneels down, then stands up halfway, then shifts its weight in a way that strongly suggests it's considering launching you into orbit. You cling on. Everyone is laughing. One soldier is already limping from a camel-induced tumble. You suspect this is going to be a recurring theme. See, no one in the French army actually knows how to ride a camel. The idea was bold. Camels are perfect for the desert. Indigenous cultures have used them for centuries. But nobody thought to hire enough local camel handlers, or trainers, or camel whisperers. You're on your own, wobbling through dunes like a drunken marionette on stilts. Napoleon, meanwhile, rides a horse. Of course he does. It's a stately, shiny animal that somehow stays clean despite the dust. Napoleon rides ahead, framed against the horizon like he's posing for future oil paintings. He does not acknowledge the camel chaos behind him. The inland march is less of a march and more of a staggering, dusty stumble. The heat climbs fast. The sun turns brutal before noon. Soldiers begin stripping layers, cursing their uniforms, and trying to find shade under their own hats. You see one guy walking backward, claiming it keeps the sun off his face longer. He walks into a cactus. The terrain alternates between fine powdery sand and rough, jagged stones that seem to exist solely to destroy shoes. Every step feels like you're grinding your feet into a giant mortar. And the mirages. Pools of water shimmer in the distance, always a few hundred yards away. Always gone when you get closer. It's maddening. Someone tries to dive in and eat sand like it's a delicacy. Logistics start unraveling by day 2. The supply wagons are too heavy. The wheels sink. The camels bolt. One company loses half their biscuit ration when a crate topples into the sand and instantly becomes a buffet for ants the size of thumbnails. You eat yours anyway. Texture is subjective now. One historian describes this part of the campaign as a ballet of suffering. You'd lean toward a farcical group hike organized by someone who's only seen sand in paintings. They curse with dramatic flair. Some start composing poetry about sand. One begins carving verses into his rifle stock. Another names his camel Voltaire and claims it's developing a personality. You pass scattered oases, some real, some cruel illusions. The real ones are quiet, clustered with date palms, where you can refill canteens and wash your face in tepid, slightly bitter water. It tastes like salvation. You don't care that it smells vaguely like frogs. Each night, the camp settles like a sigh across the landscape. Tents flap in the hot breeze. Fires crackle. Soldiers gossip, complain, write letters no one will read, and stare up at stars that burn brighter out here than anywhere in Europe. The desert sky is huge, intimidating, cosmic. Someone mentions how small they feel under it, and someone else throws a scorpion at them. Bonding. But the tension is building. You hear mutters about the Mamluks, elite cavalry warriors who supposedly ride like spirits across the dunes. Glittering armor, curved swords, a taste for battle and luxury. Napoleon speaks of them often in his briefings, describing them as decadent and doomed. But you can sense the edge in his voice. He knows they're not to be taken lightly. Historians still debate how prepared Napoleon really was for this kind of warfare. His strategies were brilliant in Europe's tidy towns and trimmed fields. But this is different. Here, the land itself is the enemy. Sand clogs everything. Maps are vague. Distances lie. And the Mamluks know this terrain like a mother knows her child's cry. Somewhere along the third day, someone accidentally discovers that camel dung burns very well. Dry, compact, and surprisingly efficient. Within hours, it becomes the army's primary fuel source. You've never seen so many people so excited about excrement. Soon, fires are lit with camel chips, and the smell becomes the background scent of the entire expedition. A kind of rustic aroma that will haunt your dreams as the march drags on. You start noticing how the land shifts subtly. Less rocky outcrop, more vast nothingness. The color palette narrows beige, tan, light brown, and despair. Occasionally, you see ruined structures on the horizon, broken pillars, half-buried statues, maybe a forgotten temple. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they vanish when you blink. And then, just as you're starting to hallucinate a conversation with your canteen, the horizon changes again. A faint line of green appears, trees, civilization, Cairo. But between you and the city lies something else of faint shape, like a jagged shadow clinging to the sand. That, your captain tells you, is where the Mamluks are waiting, and they know you're coming. You look back over your shoulder. Behind you, camels chewing, men slump, smoke rising from a dung-fueled fire. Ahead of you, history. You're beginning to wonder if this was all just a very long, very sweaty way for Napoleon to prove something to his high school history teacher. Because here you are, trudging through the Egyptian desert behind a man who decided, more or less on a whim, that he should invade an entire country mostly for reasons. Why Egypt? Why now? The answers, like everything Napoleon touches, are complicated and a bit theatrical. You sip from your nearly empty canteen, swish warm water around your mouth, and consider the many conflicting motives bouncing around in his powdered head. On paper, it all sounds perfectly rational. By the late 1790s, France was surrounded by enemies. The British Navy ruled the waves, and the French economy was somewhere between tragic and held together with optimism and cheese. Napoleon pitched Egypt as a masterstroke way to cut off Britain's precious trade route to India by grabbing control of the Red Sea. Knock out a domino, destabilize the empire. Historians still argue whether he truly believed this plan would work, or if it was just a smokescreen for his own ambitions. Some suggest it was never really about Egypt at all, but about Napoleon positioning himself as a larger-than-life hero. If he couldn't conquer Europe yet, maybe he could play Alexander the Great. In the Middle East, of course, he didn't exactly ask Egypt how it felt about this idea. At the time, Egypt was nominally under Ottoman control, but in reality it was run by the Mamluks, fierce, semi-autonomous warlords on horseback who collected taxes, ruled cities, and didn't particularly enjoy being liberated. Some shared the exotic vision Egypt, sand, glory. Others mumbled about the cost, the risk, and the fact that France's navy wasn't exactly in top form. Napoleon didn't care. He wanted to leave. He needed to leave. See, after years of victory across Europe, the political waters in Paris were getting murky. The government, the Directory, was suspicious of Napoleon's popularity. A hero returning with too many medals has a habit of becoming a threat. So off he went with full support, to conquer a faraway land and be someone else's problem for a while. Preferably the British's. Napoleon also had a romantic streak about Egypt. He'd read all the classics. Herodotus, Plutarch. He believed Egypt was the cradle of science, art, and knowledge. He called it the gift of the Nile. He told his generals that they weren't just soldiers, they were torchbearers of civilization. You snort softly. Someone behind you coughs out. Torchbearers were more like sand magnets. The idea was part propaganda, part Enlightenment fantasy. Napoleon wanted to show that France didn't just conquer it enlightened. Never mind the cannons. Look, we brought telescopes. But even this high-minded mission was full of contradictions. The French army looted where they pleased. Their presence disrupted centuries-old customs. They claimed to liberate Egypt from the Mamluks, but most Egyptians just saw them as new overlords with funny hats. You ride past a village that's clearly seen better days. Mud brick homes crumble under the sun. Chickens scatter. Children peer out from behind doorways, curious and wary. An old man yells something in Arabic that your fellow soldier insists is a blessing. You suspect it's more of a curse. Napoleon, of course, sees none of this. He is busy dictating memos, planning speeches, and refining his future memoirs in real time. He talks about building roads, reforming taxes, and founding schools. But you haven't seen a school yet. You've seen heatstroke. You've seen camel blisters. And you've seen one guy try to dry his socks on a musket barrel, which went exactly as badly as you'd imagine. Then, there's the religious tightrope. Egypt is deeply Islamic, and Napoleon, knowing this, is trying to play nice. He orders proclamations declaring respect for the Prophet Muhammad, insists his men avoid offending local customs, and even hints very vaguely that the French might be spiritually aligned with Islam. Historians still debate how cynical this tactic was. Did Napoleon sincerely admire Islamic culture, or was it just another tool and his charm offensive? What's clear is that very few people in Egypt bought it. Actions, as always, spoke louder than proclamations. Meanwhile, the French troops, many of whom haven't traveled more than 10 miles from their home villages, before now are completely overwhelmed. The language barrier is immense. The food is strange. The sun is relentless. And the dessert doesn't care if you're wearing a uniform or not. A French account from one soldier's letter complains that a falafel gave him visions of St. Peter riding a camel through the stars. No word on whether it was food poisoning or spiritual awakening. But you've definitely never trusted street food the same way since. One night around the campfire, a lieutenant pulls out a battered copy of the Quran acquired, possibly looted. Dan begins reading it aloud with terrible pronunciation. A local translator politely takes it from him, flips it right side up, and corrects the Frenchman's mistakes. You're not sure if it's a sincere attempt at cultural respect or just one of the more awkward moments in military history. Still, amidst all the confusion and contradiction, you sense something undeniable. This land is old. Older than Rome. Older than Jesus. Older than even the word France. Every stone, every scrap of pottery, every faint carving in a rock face reminds you that you're an intruder in a place that's seen empires rise and crumble like sandcastles. Napoleon might see glory. You see ghosts. And tomorrow, you march toward the pyramids. You wake to the distinct sound of camels snorting and soldiers groaning, which by now is your alarm clock. Someone's boiling water over a fire made from last night's camel droppings. Yes. Still, and you start your day with something resembling tea and a distant sense of foreboding. The sun hasn't fully risen. but you can already see it looming on the horizon like a mirage that refuses to fade. Sharp, angular shadows breaking the otherwise endless line of sand. The pyramids, and they are big, which sounds stupid, because of course they're big. But you weren't prepared for this kind of big. They don't look like buildings. They look like mountains. Man-made geometry towering over a world that's mostly flat and empty. You stare at them like you're looking at time itself, frozen in stone. Napoleon stares too, probably composing a quote in his head. Later he'll say, "Soldiers, from the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." Romantic, commanding, and slightly terrifying when you realize he might mean it literally. But that's not today. That's tomorrow. Today, you're still marching, still sweaty, still swatting flies with your hat like it's a fencing duel. The French army is approaching Cairo, but the Mamluks have no intention of letting them waltz in. They're gathering at a spot near Mbaba, just across the Nile from the capital. You're told they're preparing a full cavalry charge. You're also told they have hundreds of horsemen covered in glittering armor, like medieval knights, only with curved sabers and an attitude problem. You're on camel patrol. Again. Your camel, whom you've reluctantly named Pascal after a philosopher you once failed to read, is still unpredictable. One moment he's cruising smoothly like a desert yacht, the next he's lunging sideways at imaginary enemies. Another soldier suggests that camels are secretly telepathic. You're starting to believe him. Around midday, Napoleon calls a halt. The officers gather to discuss battle plans. You're waved away, not important enough to overhear anything strategic. But the rumors trickle down fast. They say the Mamluks have positioned themselves in a crescent formation, ready to charge the moment you get too close. The French infantry. They'll respond with their beloved tactic, the square. Now, if you've never seen an infantry square, it's basically human origami with bayonets. A tight, boxy formation of men with muskets pointed outward on all sides. Cavalry hates it. Charging into a square is like running face first into a porcupine made of gunpowder and swearing. But this is the desert. There are no hedges to hide behind, no trees for cover. Just sand and sun and the long flat silence before violence. You spend the rest of the day building shallow trenches, sharpening bayonets, and praying your canteen hasn't developed another slow leak. One engineer tries to sketch the pyramids, but it ends up looking more like angry triangles. He gives up and starts cataloging scarabs instead. That night, under stars that seem almost too sharp, you hear drumming in the distance. The Mamluks are making a show with their horns, drums, war cries, letting you know they're there. They're ready, and they do not like tourists with muskets. You roll over in your blanket and try to sleep. Napoleon supposedly sleeps soundly, his tent neatly arranged, his boots polished even in the middle of nowhere. You, however, get maybe 20 minutes before a scorpion crawls across your wrist. You flick it off. It flicks you off in return. Somewhere in the darkness, you think about the pyramids again. They've seen worse. They've seen Ramses, Alexander, Caesar. They've seen Napoleon coming from miles away. Historians still argue whether Napoleon genuinely respected Egyptian history, or just wanted to own it. He had coins minted with Egyptian motifs, declared himself protector of Islam, and sometimes dressed in robes just to connect with the people. But then his troops would loot a tomb, or dismantle a mosque wall for construction material, and the illusion would crumble faster than a sandcastle in a dust storm. At dawn, everything smells like sweat and tension. The French line up, the squares forming with mathematical precision. You take your place. Pascal the camel watches from a safe distance, unimpressed. In the silence, you hear horses, and then they come. The Mamluk cavalry, cloaks flaring, scimitars raised, descend like a wave of silver teeth. Their horses move like they're part of the wind. It's not just an attack, it's theater. Intimidation, that glory. For a split second, you want to drop your musket and applaud. But the squares hold. Volley after volley erupts from French muskets. The cavalry hits the wall of bayonets and stumbles. You see bodies fall. Horse is real. The thunder of hooves becomes a tangle of chaos and sand. It's brutal, fast, and dusty as hell. Napoleon stays cool. He watches from his perch, giving calm orders, probably thinking about his next dramatic quote. You reload, fire, repeat. Your shoulder bruises from the kickback. You bite into a cartridge to load faster and taste gunpowder and sweat. A Mamluk rider breaks through the line and gets within feet before being taken down. His armor shatters like glass when it hits the sand. And then, silence. The Mamluks retreat, not broken, but beaten. Their horses limp away. Their banners sag. Cairo is now exposed. The road ahead lies open. The Battle of the Pyramids is over. And for the first time in this mad desert adventure, you realize something. Napoleon might just pull this off. You also realize that your boots are filled with sand, your ears are ringing, and someone behind you is very confidently claiming to have killed at least 8 guys. Though he doesn't seem to have fired his weapon. The sun climbs higher. The pyramids cast long shadows over the battlefield. You stare up at them, awed, tired, and wondering how many more fools like you have marched past them over the centuries. Pascal sneezes. You take that as a sign to keep moving. You limp into Cairo with sand in your teeth and an ache in your thighs that might be permanent. The French have done it. The Mamluks scattered after the Battle of the Pyramids, and just like that, the great city of Cairo has fallen out with a spectacular siege or months of attrition, but with a slightly theatrical cavalry standoff and a whole lot of square formations. Cairo is like no place you've seen. It's noisy, chaotic, old in a way that makes Paris feel like it was built last week, and filled with the smell of spices, livestock, and something faintly electrical. Like ozone or magic or maybe just poor sanitation. The French march in as conquerors, but there's no ticker tape parade. The locals stare from rooftops, behind shutters, through the folds of veils and turbans. They are unimpressed. You can't blame them. One minute it's Mamluks collecting taxes. The next it's short Europeans with nosebleed-inducing hats trying to explain liberty, equality, and fraternity with hand gestures. Napoleon sets up shop in a large villa and immediately begins his favorite pastime, micromanaging an entire civilization. He declares himself protector of the rights of the people, a bold choice. Considering he arrived with cannons, he promises reform, modernization, and justice. He bans looting and issues proclamations in awkwardly translated Arabic, some of which say things like, "We are friends of Islam, and the French are more Muslim than the Mamluks," which would be hilarious if it weren't so politically explosive. Historians still debate whether Napoleon believed any of this, or if he was just the world's most ambitious improviser. Some argue he saw himself as a philosopher king, bringing Enlightenment values to the East. Others say it was all theater posturing to maintain control. Either way, the scholars he brought the savants finally get to work. They fan out through Cairo and beyond, measuring, sketching, cataloging like children in a very fragile, very sacred toy store. One botanist marvels at the Nile Delta's unique ecosystem. An engineer accidentally sets a loom on fire, trying to reverse engineer local textiles. It's equal parts brilliance and bumbling. You pass one savant, wide-eyed and sunburnt, who asks if you know where he can buy crocodile bones. You do not. You also don't ask why he needs them. Still, it's not all awkward interactions and cultural mistranslations. Cairo begins to shift, just a little. Napoleon establishes a local council, mostly figureheads, to give the illusion of cooperation. He sends doctors into poor neighborhoods, tries to clean the streets, orders that bread be distributed fairly. For a brief moment, the French seem like they might actually govern, not just conquer. But resistance simmers. At first, it's quiet, a refusal to answer questions, a door that doesn't open, a prayer recited with more fervor than usual. Then, one night, it explodes. The Cairo revolt begins with whispers and ends with gunfire. In late October, the city erupts. Locals storm French outposts, kill soldiers, and barricade streets. The Mosque of Al-Azhar, one of the oldest Islamic universities in the world, becomes a rallying point. You're caught in the middle of it trying to find cover behind a cart of pomegranates. While bullets whistle overhead, the French scramble to regain control. Artillery is brought in. Napoleon, furious, orders the mosque shelled. The scholars are horrified. You are too, but mostly you're focused on not dying. By the time the revolt is crushed, hundreds are dead. The streets run with muddy water and soot. Napoleon tours the city afterward with a stony face, as if daring anyone to try again. He claims victory. He always does. But something has changed. The illusion of peaceful occupation is broken. The people know now, the French are not here to liberate. They're here to rule. A quirky detail surfaces days later. Napoleon had spies report rumors that he was secretly a convert to Islam. He did nothing to deny it. Some accounts claim he considered circumcision to bolster the charade, but thought better of it. Historians still debate how close he came to following through. You find yourself walking through Cairo's streets with a new kind of alertness. The city is not yours. It never was. It tolerates your presence like one tolerates a pigeon at a cafe table, warily, and only because you haven't made a mess. Yet, meanwhile, the savants continue their work. They're documenting everything: insects, dialects, architectural flourishes. One even creates a primitive refrigeration system using evaporative cooling and a clay jar. You start using it to keep your water lukewarm instead of boiling hot. Revolutionary. But the real prize is still out there. Ancient ruins. Stone temples buried in sand. Obelisks covered in hieroglyphs no one can read. Napoleon wants more than just Cairo, he wants Egypt's secrets. So he orders expeditions south, up the Nile, to Thebes, Luxor, and beyond. You're assigned to one. More marching, more sand, and more chances to get sunburned in places you didn't think skin existed. Still, there's something mesmerizing about it. You pass villages where time seems stuck in another era, where irrigation is done with hand-turned wheels and oxen, where men in linen robes fish with woven nets. Children wave at you. Sometimes they throw rocks. It's a toss-up. You camp near temples with columns as wide as buildings. Carvings that show gods with falcon heads and crocodile tails. The scholars sketch, measure, theorize. They debate whether the ancient Egyptians were descended from Africans, Mediterraneans, or some lost civilization entirely. And they wonder what the hieroglyphs mean. No one knows yet. Not until the Rosetta Stone, which you haven't seen but keep hearing about, gets cracked. A French story emerges around the campfires one night. A fellow soldier claims he saw a ghost near the tombstone, gold skin, eyes glowing like lamps. Someone else insists it was a desert fox with mange. You decide it was probably heat stroke and focus on your ration biscuit, which tastes like regret. Meanwhile, Pascal the camel has finally stopped trying to bite you. You take this as a sign that he's either warming up to you or too exhausted to care. As you watch the sun set over a temple roof, you realize you're not just marching through a war. You're marching through history's attic. Dusty, sacred, echoing with things long forgotten. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question forms. What happens when you're asked to leave? You return to Cairo with sandals half worn and skin the consistency of roasted chickpeas. The sun's gotten more aggressive, like it's personally offended you're still here. And Cairo has changed not again. Or maybe it's just that you've been in the ruins too long. Too many silent columns. Too many nights with your blanket full of sand. Now the noise and smoke feel like a different world. Napoleon is reorganizing. Again. It's his favorite hobby. New administrative councils. New tax codes. And surprise, another decree about how the French respect local customs. The locals, meanwhile, are deeply unconvinced. You hear it in the tone of the shopkeepers and the extra second of silence when you pass. You're not a liberator. You're a house guest that won't leave and keeps moving the furniture. Still, the expedition rolls on, literally and figuratively. The savants are assembling something extraordinary, a massive compilation of everything they found, called the Description de Legend. Drawings, maps, diagrams, essays. If knowledge were bricks, they're building a pyramid of their own. One savant has been obsessing over beetle scarabs, specifically. He's convinced they're keys to some mystical symbolism system. He corners you one day, clutching a jar of live ones, and launches into a theory about solar rebirth and cyclical time. You nod, sip your lukewarm tea, and wonder if the sun has boiled his brain. Historians still argue whether Napoleon truly intended the description to be a scientific gift to the world or a propaganda tool wrapped in scholarly ribbon. Either way, it becomes one of the most ambitious academic projects of its era. It also, notably, requires soldiers like you to haul crates of stone rubbings and dissected ibis skeletons around the city. Less glorious. Meanwhile, tension bubbles. News trickles in like condensation on a wine bottle, slow, blurry, a little sour. Something about uprisings in Upper Egypt. Something about British ships. You ask around. No one knows for sure. But the officers are definitely whispering more. And then the mosques fall quiet. It's the call to prayer. But it's different, shorter, harsher. Then, gunshots. The Second Cairo Revolt has begun. This time, it's sharper. More organized. French troops are targeted in alleyways. Markets erupt into violence. Civilians turn militant with terrifying speed. And you're caught in a spice shop when it starts, crouched between bags of cumin and coriander as bullets shred the air outside. You crawl out the back. A donkey bolts past you with a broken harness. A woman throws boiling water from a rooftop, no one sure who she was aiming at. The French react hard. They cordon off whole neighborhoods. They roll out artillery again. Napoleon, famously thin-skinned when challenged, responds with overwhelming force. The Al-Azhar Mosque is shelled again. The backlash is enormous. Even sympathetic locals recoil. This isn't just a battle, it's cultural desecration. In the aftermath, you help dig trenches and drag wounded men back behind makeshift barricades. A young officer mutters that this whole expedition is cursed. You don't argue, especially when you realize a stray kid has taken up permanent residence in your tent and hisses. Whenever someone says Napoleon, another discovers a local method of water purification using crushed dates and charcoal. You store the tidbit away, you're pretty sure your last sip of Nile water had something alive in it. You're assigned to patrol the Nile's western bank, which sounds romantic until you realize it means dragging your gear through knee-deep mud and fending off mosquitoes the size of pigeons. One evening, you find a sunken stone slab covered in hieroglyphs, half submerged in the water. You alert a passing savant, who weeps openly upon seeing it. Later, he names a papyrus species after you. It's not very attractive. Word finally arrives. The British are blockading the coast. Admiral Nelson, known for being both brilliant and dramatically theatrical, has obliterated the French fleet at Aboukir Bay. It happened weeks ago. You're only hearing about it now because Napoleon didn't want to kill the mood. The news hits like a slap. You're stranded. No ships. No supplies coming. No going home. Napoleon spins it as a test of strength, as if being cut off from Europe was part of the plan. You start hearing phrases like self-sufficiency and strategic resilience being thrown around in officer meetings. You also hear more grumbling in the ranks. Your camel, Pascal, has been staring at you differently ever since the news. You're pretty sure he senses your rising panic. Or maybe he just wants more dates. Napoleon, for his part, doesn't blink. He throws himself into governance, rebuilding bridges, opening schools, founding a newspaper, and French, of course. You help distribute the first issue, which features an editorial declaring the French expedition a beacon of progress. One of the local boys uses his copy to wrap figs. There's a curious moment late one afternoon. You're walking near the Citadel when a group of French musicians starts playing a Beethoven sonata on makeshift instruments. Locals gather, silent. Some look bewildered. Others close their eyes. For a few strange minutes, Cairo is quiet. You sit on a step and listen. The sun casts long shadows, and no one moves. Later, You learn that Napoleon had ordered the performance personally, part of his charm offensive. He believes music can soothe rebellion. You admire the optimism, but Cairo remains tense. The streets don't trust you anymore. They're polite, but brittle. You feel like a vase perched on a table during an earthquake. Fine for now, but don't sneeze. And still, the work continues. The savants are giddy with finds. One discovers ancient graffiti inside a temple, cruelly drawn stick figures, and what may be a rude joke about the pharaoh's ears. Another believes he's decoded part of the Book of the Dead, only to realize he's been reading it upside down. You dream in hieroglyphs now, strange animals, repeating symbols, eyes that never blink. One night, a fellow soldier tells you the Mamluks are regrouping in the south. Another says he saw a British spy in a Cairo bathhouse. A third, who may just be drunk, insists Napoleon is going to declare himself pharaoh. You're not sure whether to laugh or worry, but one thing is clear. This is no longer a campaign. It's an occupation. A slow, grinding attempt to control a place that refuses to be controlled. You feel it in the way the air hangs heavy, in the endless, circling buzz of flies, in the way even Pascal won't move unless you bribe him with raisins. The sun sets red again. The Nile flows dark. Cairo breathes slow, ancient, waiting. And you keep marching,